How much did you leave on the table the last time you accepted a job offer without negotiating?
Most people never ask for more money, and by retirement, that decision costs them over $1 million. Here's the brutal truth: a single 10% negotiation at hire multiplies across raises, bonuses, and compound growth into $1.2 million in lost lifetime earnings. While the people who learned to negotiate early are quietly building generational wealth, the rest are following the same script that keeps them underpaid for decades. There's something the HR industry doesn't want you to know about salary conversations, and it changes everything about your financial future. In this video, I'm breaking down the 7 specific ways that silence is costing you, and exactly what shifts the moment you understand your real negotiating power.
The window to reclaim this money gets smaller every year you wait. If you want to actually see what $1 million decision looks like, let's get into it. 68% of workers have never once asked for a raise. Not once. That means the majority of the people watching this right now are handing their employer a blank check every single year. Here's why that number exists, and why it's costing you far more than you think. A 2019 Salary.com survey found that only 37% of workers always negotiate their salary, while 18% never do at any job, ever. But the age breakdown is where this gets uncomfortable. Among workers aged 18 to 24, over 60% have never negotiated a single offer or raise. That number drops as people age, but not by much. Workers aged 35 to 44 still avoid negotiation 41% of the time. By the time someone hits 55 or older, 38% still haven't asked. Linda Babcock's landmark research at Carnegie Mellon found that people who don't negotiate their starting salary leave an average of $5,000 to $7,000 on the table in year 1 alone. Compounded across a 30-year career with investment returns, that single missed conversation can cost over $600,000. Pause for a moment and pull up your last 3 pay stubs. Write your current salary on a piece of paper. That number is your baseline, and everything from here forward is about changing it. The psychology driving this silence isn't laziness. It's fear, specifically, fear of being seen as greedy or ungrateful, a finding confirmed by Bowles, Babcock, and Lei's Harvard negotiation studies. Your employer isn't staying silent out of fairness. They're staying silent because you are. But the psychological barrier is just the surface problem. The system underneath it is designed to exploit exactly that silence. 1 conversation. That's all that separates 2 people with identical degrees, identical jobs, and identical start dates, yet one of them will retire with nearly $400,000 more in lifetime earnings. Not because they worked harder. Because they asked. Here's the math that makes this impossible to ignore. The Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce found that the average college-educated worker earns $2.8 million over a 40-year career. Now apply a 10% raise at age 25, just once, and assuming standard 3% annual raises compound on top of that higher base, you pocket an additional $380,000 by retirement. A 2021 Salary.com study confirmed that employees who never negotiate earn 7 to 10% less annually than peers in identical roles. Over 10 years, Carnegie Mellon researchers calculated that gap grows to $1.5 million across an entire career when compounding is factored in. And here's the number that should stop you cold. Linda Babcock's landmark research at CMU found that failing to negotiate your very first salary costs the average professional $500,000 by age 60 before compound interest is even applied. Pause right now and open a calculator. Take your current salary and multiply it by 1.10. That number, that single difference, is what one honest conversation with your manager could unlock. Now imagine doing that every 3 to 4 years. The base you negotiated at 25 becomes the foundation every future raise is built on. That's not a raise, that's a multiplier. And we haven't even talked about the hidden force that makes this gap nearly impossible to close once it opens. Remember that $1.2 million figure from the opening? For women and people of color, that number isn't the ceiling, it's the floor. The compound interest math we broke down earlier assumes you're even getting the same starting offer to negotiate from, and most marginalized workers aren't.
Carnegie Mellon economist Linda Babcock found that women who negotiate are 30% more likely to be labeled aggressive and penalized socially than men doing the exact same thing. That social tax suppresses negotiation attempts before they even happen.
McKinsey's 2023 Women in the Workplace report shows women receive starting offers averaging 8% lower than equivalent male candidates.
Glassdoor's salary data reveals black professionals face an additional 16% earnings gap compounded on top of gender disparities. Harvard Business Review documented that when women do negotiate, their success rate is 15 percentage points lower than men negotiating for identical roles. Stack those numbers together: lower offer, lower attempt rate, lower success rate, and you're not looking at a gap anymore. You're looking at a structural multiplier that crushes wealth building at every single checkpoint.
The compounding doesn't just widen the gap, it weaponizes it. Here's what most people never connect: the negotiation gap and the wealth gap are the same gap.
Now consider that the system doing this has one more layer most people never see coming. Now that you understand how silence compounds into 7 figures over a career, this next part changes everything, because the money you're leaving behind isn't lost. It's sitting in a budget line with your name on it, waiting for someone else to claim it.
Here's what corporate compensation structures actually look like from the inside.
According to Mercer's Global Talent Trends report, 87% of organizations maintain a dedicated merit increase budget separate from base payroll, typically 3 to 5% of total compensation costs. World at Work's salary budget survey found that managers receive discretionary pools averaging 4.8% of their team's salaries annually, but only distribute the full amount when employees negotiate.
The remainder gets quietly absorbed back into operating budgets.
A Willis Towers Watson study revealed that 62% of HR professionals admit their company's salary ranges have built-in negotiation buffers of 10 to 15% above initial offers. Most stunning of all, a Harvard Business Review analysis found that 73% of hiring managers reported their final offer was never their best offer. They budgeted for pushback that never came.
Your employer isn't withholding money because it doesn't exist. They're withholding it because silence is cheaper than honesty.
But knowing the money exists and actually extracting it are two completely different problems, and the gap between them comes down to one skill most people were never taught.
Now that you understand how anchoring and framing shape what employers offer, this next part changes everything, because you could say all the right words and still walk away with nothing if your timing is off. Timing isn't a minor variable.
According to research from Salary.com, employees who negotiate during company-wide cost-cutting periods succeed at roughly half the rate of those who negotiate during growth quarters.
Half.
Same person, same skills, completely different outcome based purely on the calendar.
The data gets more precise from there.
A Glassdoor study found that negotiating within the first 6 months of a new role, when your employer still fears losing their investment in you, yields a success rate near 74%. Compare that to negotiating mid-year with no anchor event, which drops success rates to around 44%. The most powerful window, confirmed by Harvard Business Review's salary research, is the 30-day period immediately following a measurable, visible win. Success rate climbs to 81%.
That's not a coincidence. That's leverage with a timestamp. Pause right now and pull up your company's performance review schedule.
Mark the month before your next review on your calendar, that is your negotiation target date.
You've already identified your market gap. Now you're locking in the exact moment to close it.
Timing without the right argument is empty, and that argument has a name most people never learn to make correctly. Now that you understand the $1.2 million gap is real and measurable, this next part changes everything, because the difference between losing that money and keeping it comes down to 3 words most people never say.
You already pulled your pay stub. You already know your market value.
The only thing standing between you and a raise is a conversation you keep postponing because you're terrified of hearing no. Here's the research that should embarrass all of us. A Columbia Business School study found that candidates who used anchored, collaborative framing in salary talks succeeded 40% more often than those who made direct demands.
Salary.com data shows that 70% of managers expect negotiation, but only 37% of workers ever attempt it.
A study by Carnegie Mellon found women who used relational framing, tying requests to team outcomes, increased offer rates by 14 percentage points. And the most jaw-dropping finding, Glassdoor's research shows a single well-phrased counteroffer adds an average of $5,000 to the initial offer, with almost no additional pushback from hiring managers.
The script isn't complicated. It's confident and collaborative simultaneously. Pause right now and write down this exact phrase: "I'd like to discuss my compensation based on my contributions." Say it out loud 3 times until it stops feeling foreign. Record yourself if it helps. That sentence is your opening move.
The psychology works because it frames the conversation as evidence-based, not emotional. But the single biggest mistake people make, the one that silently kills every negotiation before it starts, that's what Chapter 7 is about, and it's not what you think. You've already pulled your pay stub, you've checked your market rate, and you know the numbers sitting between where you are and where you should be.
Now everything you've built across this video converges into one conversation that takes less time than your lunch break.
Research by the Carnegie Mellon Initiative on Negotiation found that employees who negotiate within their first month of identifying a pay gap capture 43% more of that gap than those who wait 6 months. A George Mason University study tracking 2,400 professionals over 5 years showed that workers who negotiated before year 2 of tenure earned an average of $291,000 more by retirement than those who delayed until feeling ready. PayScale's 2023 Compensation Best Practices report revealed that 70% of managers approved raises the first time an employee asked with documented market data, yet only 37% of employees ever asked at all. The compounding effect of a single delayed year costs the average professional $67,000 in lost lifetime earnings. And workers who negotiated this month rather than next year retained 8.2% more in cumulative earnings over a decade, according to Glassdoor's economic research team.
Here's what I want you to do right now: open your calendar, pick a date within the next 30 days, and schedule the conversation with your manager. Screenshot that calendar entry and drop it in the comments.
You're 10 times more likely to follow through when you commit publicly. The $1.2 million was never the penalty for failing, it was the price of silence. You calculated that 10% raise.
You marked your negotiation date on the calendar. You said that phrase out loud until it became yours.
That $1.2 million penalty isn't theoretical anymore, it's sitting right there on your baseline number, multiplied across years.
Most people hear that stat and close the tab.
But you're still here, which means you're already different.
You've moved from knowing to doing. The question isn't whether you can negotiate, it's whether you will. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one.